Bienvenidos a la cuarta clase de este curso de inglés pre-avanzado completamente gratis. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel to receive notifications because I upload a new video every Monday and Thursday. And of course you can join the Facebook group to download all of my resources, including the presentation for today's class. Today we're going to be studying the past perfect continuous tense. Then we're going to be looking at the differences between past perfect normal and past perfect continuous. And finally, we're going to add those to our collection of past tenses in order to create past narratives. Let's begin. So the first thing we're going to study is the past perfect continuous. Okay, so here I have a list of all the different tenses which include past in some form or other, right? So remember that the present perfect includes the present moment and the past. Present perfect continuous is the same. Past perfect, we've seen it before. Past perfect continuous, we're going to study today. The past simple and past continuous. So here I have some examples, right? And I just want you to take a moment to match the examples to the tense that they're from, okay? For example, present perfect tense, here's the example, right? We have visited our parents twice this year. Hemos visitado, that's present perfect. Take a moment, and I'm going to tell you the answers in 3, 2, 1. So the example of present perfect continuous that we have here is down there. She's been playing the violin for years. Ha estado tocando the violin for years. That's present perfect continuous. The example of past perfect, there it is. I hadn't been there before. No había estado, no había ido antes. Vamos a brincar. Past simple would be she didn't call me back. No me regresó la llamada. No me marcó. And past continuous, it wasn't raining at 3 p.m. Okay, a las 3 no estaba lloviendo. So the only option we have left for past perfect continuous is this one. We hadn't been waiting long. No habíamos estado esperando mucho tiempo. Haber estado haciendo algo. That's past perfect continuous. Okay. So, remember this from class 3 of level intermediate? We looked at past continuous, right? Do you remember this? This is old grammar. So, ¿qué hacías o qué estabas haciendo cuando algo más pasó? So, yesterday I was walking, continuous action, in the park when I fell, interruption, and hurt my arm. So again, here you have walking, 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 and then an interruption, right? I fell. It's used exactly the same way in Spanish and English. I was walking in the park when I fell and hurt my arm, or I fell and hurt my arm when or while I was walking in the park. So here you have that example again, right? Walking in the park and fell. So now we're being specific about something that you had been doing before something else happened, okay? There's not much difference between the two. Lo que estabas haciendo y lo que habías estado haciendo antes de que algo más pasara, right? So here is the example I've got here. We hadn't been waiting long. No habíamos estado esperando mucho tiempo cuando la enfermera llegó, when the nurse arrived, okay? Lo que habías estado haciendo antes de que algo más pasara es una versión más complicada, ¿no? Pero son muy parecidos. Al grado de que podría también decir I had been walking in the park for 2 hours when I fell. Si estoy hablando de la duración de algo, puedo decir había estado caminando en el parque durante 2 horas cuando me caí, right? I had been walking in the park for 2 hours when I fell. So again, here are your 2 examples. We hadn't been waiting long when the nurse arrived, and I had been walking in the park for 2 hours when I fell. Basically, we're looking at subject with had, or had not, been, a verb ing, okay? It's not very common, okay, but it is used, for example, for asking if someone had been waiting and for asking about the context for a previous event, okay? In lots of cases, people just use the past continuous, to be honest. There's nothing wrong with saying we weren't waiting long when the nurse arrived. I mean, it's kind of not as accurate, it's not as perfect, but it still works. We weren't waiting long before the nurse arrived, or I was walking in the park for 2 hours when I fell. I mean, they're not perfect, but they're really, really good. I mean, there's no problem with them, really. So let's look at some more examples. Asking for past context in common use. So, a doctor might ask a patient, when you took the paracetamol, cuando tomaste el paracetamol, how long had you been feeling bad? Okay? ¿Durante cuánto tiempo te habías estado sintiendo mal? Right? But equally, the doctor could ask, how long were you feeling bad before you took the paracetamol? Like, that's perfectly fine as well, okay? How long were you feeling bad for before you took the paracetamol? The patient might answer, I had been feeling sick for a couple of hours. Me había estado sintiendo mal, okay? So that's past perfect continuous. Or equally, the patient could say, I was feeling sick for a couple of hours, if it's less formal, right? So you can see that the past continuous works pretty much the same as the past perfect continuous, although the past perfect continuous is more precise, okay? It's more exact. Equally, a patient could answer a couple of hours, right? So if the doctor asks, how long had you been feeling bad? Or how long were you feeling bad? The patient might just say a couple of hours, right? And avoid this problem. Giving context in common use. So giving context in a story, I had been driving for about 6 hours when, okay? It's less common to say I was driving for about 6 hours when something else happened, because this isn't technically correct, all right? When you're talking about a past duration before an event, like specifically you're interested in saying how long something had been happening before something else happened to stop it or to interrupt it, then you would use the past perfect continuous, okay? If you're interested in being precise. Remember that the past continuous is kind of about the general background, lo que pasaba en el fondo, lo que estaba pasando. Pero si quieres hablar específicamente de una acción y cuánto tiempo específicamente lo habías estado haciendo antes de que algo más pasara, antes de que llegaras, antes de que hicieras otra cosa, you have to use the past perfect continuous, okay? So there's a slight difference there. So in this story, if I crash, right? If I crash my car, pero quiero transmitir, I want to transmit how long I was driving before because it's important for the story, then I could say I had been driving. I had been driving for about 6 hours when I fell asleep and I crashed my car, okay? I was driving for about 6 hours when I fell asleep and crashed my car. It's okay, but it's not as precise. Like, it doesn't sound as precise. In a different context, though, I was driving to London when I crashed my car. Like, that's fine because you're talking about the journey, the background, el fondo, right? ¿Qué hacías cuando chocaste? O a dónde ibas? I was driving to London. Okay. Right? That's fine. That's perfect as a background. But if I want to emphasize the quantity of time, the duration before the crash, then I would say I'd been driving for about 6 hours before the crash. More context for background. It was raining that night, for example. That's fine. As opposed to it had been raining for 6 hours. Okay? Let's do an exercise. Go to point number 1 in the description to open the activity. So this is the first page. This is all past perfect continuous, okay? This is just to practice writing it, okay? So John, wait for us, okay? John, so it's going to be had been waiting. What she read, okay? What had she been reading, okay? The ducks had been swimming. Pretty simple. The page for the second activity is the same. We're just practicing the past perfect progressive at this point. So we had been sleeping. They had been waiting, right? Had been waiting. We had been looking for. Okay? So all of these are going to be past perfect progressive. Be careful, some of them are negative, all right? Finish the activities and I will see you in a moment. I hope that went well. Let's continue. Okay, so we've seen how to make the past perfect continuous, but now let's try and look at the difference between past perfect continuous and just the simple past perfect, okay? So, here you have the two different things, right? Past perfect and past perfect continuous. In past perfect, you have these examples. We hadn't been to Florida before. No habíamos ido a Florida antes. Sarah had already eaten. Sarah ya había comido. And we had cleaned the car 2 days earlier. Habíamos limpiado el carro 2 días antes. So you have an event, okay, or various events that happened before something else, okay? So más en el pasado, more in the past, okay? So we have to kind of imagine the context. No habíamos ido a Florida antes. Bueno, entonces estamos hablando de la vez que fuimos, ¿no? Y no habíamos ido antes. So, fuimos, pero no habíamos ido antes. Sarah had already eaten, ok. Entonces le di de comer, pero ya había comido. Le di de comer, focus or event, pero ya había comido en algún momento, right? So that's the past perfect. Distinguishing between two past events. One is more past, okay? Te di de comer, pero ya habías comido antes. Past perfect continuous is talking about the duration of one thing before the focus or the event. For example, they had been waiting for hours. Cuando llegó la enfermera, they had been waiting for hours. This duration had been going on for hours, all right? We had been living there for 6 months, okay? So, cuando algo pasó, no sabemos el contexto, habíamos estado viviendo ahí durante 6 meses, right? So, for example, here, a tornado, hurricane happened. We had been living there for 6 months. I hadn't been expecting a visit. Okay, so you visited, and here for this duration, no lo había estado esperando. I hadn't been expecting a visit. Okay, so that's the difference between past perfect and past perfect continuous. So here's an activity for you. The key is in the context. So here it says for 2 hours. We know it's a duration. So it's also a dynamic verb, so it's definitely possible to have it in the ing form. Okay, so it's going to be had been talking, right? We had been talking for 2 hours when you called. I not see her for years before that day. That's also a duration, but to see somebody or to not see somebody is not really a continuous activity, right? It's something that happens once or twice or it doesn't happen. In this case, doesn't happen. So that's going to be simple. I hadn't seen her for years. Okay, so try and complete this activity. Stop the video because I'm going to tell you the answers in 3, 2, 1. My wife and I never try. That's talking about an experience. So it's going to be simple. Had never tried. Simon, pay is going to be something that that happens once, right? You pay your bill. It's not a continuous action. So hadn't paid. They, long when Alex proposed to her, not dating, saliendo, con uno con otro. That is an activity which is continuous. So long is a duration. So they hadn't been dating long. When I woke up, I felt like I sleep for days. Okay, it's duration. So we're going to say I had been sleeping. But it's also possible to say I had slept in this case because it's like an experience, but it's fine. Sarah, to lose weight forever, but when she was 30, try, okay. Try, in this case, it could be something constant or continuous, so had been trying is fine, but also un intento puede ser varios intentos, ¿no? Había intentado bajar de peso muchas veces. So you could say she had tried as well. Let's do an activity. In the description, go to point number 2 to open the activity. Okay, so this is the activity page. If you scroll down, you can see that what we have to do here basically is complete the sentences with the correct form of the past perfect tense, either simple or continuous. Okay, so basically the same as we just finished. By the time they got to the theater, the play already is a key, right? Ya. Ya había estado empezando? No, va a ser ya había empezado. The play had already started. Okay. When he got to the finish line, for 3 hours duration, okay, he had been running. Cuando llegó a la meta, había estado corriendo durante 3 horas. Okay. Finish the activity and I will see you in a moment. I hope that went well. Let's continue. So now we're going to look at combining the past perfect continuous with all of the other tenses that we have learned together in a past narrative. So I wrote this story for you, and I want you to take a moment to read it with me before we do the activity, okay? The weather was filthy, which means like terrible weather, like a really rainy, horrible night. It had been raining seemingly for days. It had been raining apparently for days on end, so for consecutive days. And John was stuck. He sat there in the dark. So John, our character, is in one of these in the middle of the woods, okay? He sat there in the dark and he lit up a cigarette with his spare hand, his su mano libre, covering the flame so as not to alert any of the things out there in the forest to his presence, okay? The rain was hammering down on the old log cabin. So he's inside this old cabin in the forest, which is really, really wet and raining. And it's dark. And he is lighting a cigarette, but he's covering the flame. Okay. The rain was hammering down on the old log cabin, covering the sound of any approach. So you can't hear if anybody's coming closer to the cabin. His other hand was on the handle, still like quiet, on the handle of an old shotgun, loaded, which had the bullets inside it, but it wasn't cocked. It wasn't like ready, okay? I don't know how to say that in Spanish. He was breathing quietly, listening for the sounds of movement outside the cabin or scratches on the wood. The familiar moan of the undead, right? Zombies. Hungry and thirsty or thirsting for blood. He finished his cigarette and reclined against the far wall, facing the door, okay, with a gun in his hand, looking at the door, finishes his cigarette, okay. His eyes were feeling heavy. Now. He hadn't slept for days. Passes a bit of time. John awoke. He woke up to the sound of furious scratching and moans. Fire. Startled, which is like surprised, he rubbed his face and cleared his mind. Something was trying to get into the cabin. John looked around. He saw the embers, like so the little red parts of a cigarette when it's been extinguished, but it's still burning a little bit. The embers of his cigarette had been burning the bottom of a tablecloth, mantel, I think you could say. So basically the table, he was sitting next to a table and the cigarette, when he fell asleep, the cigarette caught the table on fire, right? Illuminating the cabin like a lighthouse for everyone to see. Okay, so basically he falls asleep, his cigarette catches fire to the inside of the cabin, and then basically his cabin is like a big lighthouse attracting all of the zombies to his cabin. A window smashed through and hands began reaching in, scraping the inside of the cabin wall, okay? So it's a zombie story, right? What I want you to do, I've just read the story with you. I want you to select all of the examples or find all of the examples of those four tenses, okay? Past simple, past continuous, past perfect, and past perfect continuous, okay? At the last two, there's not very many examples, but try and find them, okay? So stop the video because I'm going to tell you the answers, all right? 3, 2, 1, boom. So here you have lots and lots and lots of verbs. The red verbs are the verbs in past simple. The purple verbs, which I think I've changed. Yeah, I've changed them to like a bluey blue color. Those are past continuous verbs. The verbs that are highlighted in green, there's only one example of past perfect. No había dormido en días. He hadn't slept for days. And then there are two examples of past perfect continuous. At the beginning it says, it had been raining for days. Había estado lloviendo durante días. And had been burning, okay? So his cigarette había estado quemando the tablecloth. All right, lots of examples. So this is, I've used one or two words that we haven't seen before, like startled, embers, lighthouse. But everything else here, these are words which you should recognize, and it should be relatively straightforward for you to read a text of this quality in pre-advanced level. So yeah. Maybe you can start reading some English fiction in your free time. Exercises. Go to point number 3 in the description to do the activity. So this is the page for the activity. Basically, you have to fill in each space with either the past continuous, the past perfect simple, or the past perfect continuous, all right? It's asking you specifically to not use contractions. Don't say wasn't, okay? You have to use was not, for example, or had not been. So, I was exhausted at the end of the exam. I write for over 2 hours. Okay, so it's definitely finished and it's a duration, so I'm going to use the past perfect continuous. I had been writing. When thieves, ladrones, stole my favorite leather jacket, I was really upset. It for over 10 years. Okay, so this is a possession, it's a duration, yes, but we can't use had been having for possession. This is a stative verb. Remember, you can't say había estado teniendo una posesión. No, you dirías había tenido, right? So in this case, we're using past perfect simple. I had, which is weird, but there you go. It's asking us to not use contractions. So normally I would write this, right? I'd had, but it's asking us specifically to not use contractions. Please step out of the car, Mr. Jones. Do you realize you drive at over 90 miles an hour? Okay, so a policeman is going to say, do you realize you estabas manejando? You were driving, right? You were driving. Awesome. Finish the activity and I will see you in a moment. I hope that went well. Let's continue. So if you have time, it would be really cool for you to try and write something like this with the different past tenses that we've studied together. And perhaps you can post it on the Facebook group for the rest of us to look at. That would be really cool. But for now, that's everything I wanted to see to do with past perfect continuous. It's time for a song. So this song is by Carly Simon and it's called You're So Vain from 1972. It's a fantastic song, one of my favorites, definitely. This is saying basically to a person, eres tan vanidoso, right? So she really doesn't like this guy. What you need to do is to look at the lyrics and to find examples again, past simple, past continuous, and would. There are some songs with past perfect continuous, but it's like one example and they're not very good songs. So, you walked into the party, entraste a la fiesta, like you were walking onto a yacht, como estabas entrando en un yate, no? So like very elegantly. Your hat strategically dipped below one eye. Your hat was strategically dipped below one eye, like to be mysterious. Your scarf was apricot, which is a color, like orange. You had one eye in the mirror, so as you were walking into the party, you were looking at other people, but you were also loving yourself, right? As you watched yourself gavotte. Gavotte, I think, is a move, like to spin, like to... I don't really know. I should have checked it probably before the class, but you watched yourself gavotte. So you're watching yourself in the mirror, basically. All the girls dreamed that they would be your partner. So all of the girls in the party were like, oh, he's amazing. And the chorus is, you're so vain, okay? Eres tan vanidoso. You probably think this song is about you. A lo mejor piensas que esta canción se trata de ti. Eres tan vanidoso, tan vanidoso. Apuesto, I'll bet. Apuesto que crees que esta canción se trata de ti, right? Or no. Don't you? And then she talks about her history with this man. She said, you had me several years ago. ¿Me tuviste? Hace unos años. When I was still quite naive. Cuando yo todavía era ingenua. When you said that we made such a pretty pair and that you would never leave. Dijiste que hacíamos muy bonita pareja y nunca te irías. But you gave away the things you loved. Pero soltaste las cosas que amabas. Y una de esas era yo, right? And one of them was me. I had some dreams. They were clouds in my coffee. Tuve unos sueños, eran nubes en mi café, right? So it's like saying my dreams were just a fantasy. Okay? And then the chorus again, and then clouds in my coffee again, and then the last verse is, I hear you went up to Saratoga, okay? That's a place where you have horse races. And your horse naturally won. Y tu caballo naturalmente, por naturaleza, ganó, porque todo se te va bien, ¿no? Then you flew your Learjet up to Nova Scotia, okay? Luego volaste en tu avión privado a Nova Scotia, which is up north Canada, to see the total eclipse of the sun, para ver un eclipse. Bueno, you're where you should be all the time. Siempre estás donde debes estar. Y cuando no lo estás, and when you're not, o estás con algún espía del inframundo, o estás con la esposa de un amigo cercano. Esposa de un amigo cercano. Y, again, the chorus. You're so vain, you're so vain. So it's quite an attack song, but it's a very, very good song. Anyway, past simple, past continuous, and would, all right? So I'm going to give you a couple of seconds. Stop the video because here come the answers, all right? 3, 2, 1. Okay, here we go. So we have one example of past continuous. Lots of verbs in the past, of course. And I said would in the past. This whole story is in the past, right? But if you look at the 3 examples of would, they are actually not past would. Remember that would can be used for past as like solía. Solíamos ir. Pero en este caso sí estamos hablando de conditional would, like que serían tu pareja, right? Soñaban con ser o soñaban que serían tu pareja. Que serían tu pareja. And here again, me dijiste que nunca te irías, right? These are all conditionals, right? From second conditional. Not past. So it's kind of confusing because it's a story in the past. Pero imaginaban en el pasado que serían, conditional, tu pareja. It's interesting. Okay, one more thing. Our idioms. The 3 idioms for today are between a rock and a hard place, an arm and a leg, and a taste of your own medicine. All right? Entre la espada y la pared in Spanish. Between a rock and a hard place. In English, you'd say entre una roca, una piedra, y un lugar duro. You would say both options are bad. Like my 2 options are bad. I'm between a rock and a hard place. I'm in a difficult situation, right? That sandwich cost an arm and a leg. That means expensive, okay? Me costó un brazo y una pierna. Significa me costó bastante, era muy caro. Wow, that sandwich cost an arm and a leg. It's very often associated with cost, okay? How much does it cost, an arm and a leg? You see, I told you, you got a taste of your own medicine. Saboreaste tu propia medicina, right? This is karma, okay? If you do something bad and somebody does it back to you, then you get a taste of your own medicine. If you're really sarcastic with somebody and then somebody is sarcastic back to you, then you're tasting your own medicine, okay? So those are the 3 idioms for today. That's everything for today's class. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you can receive notifications when I upload a video on Monday or Thursday. And of course, join the Facebook group so you can download all of my resources and this presentation for free. Thank you for learning English with me, and I will see you next class.